Good day to you. Michael Didier here. Thank you for joining me. Okay, last week we covered a lot of material. I'm sorry, man. Raya said it was a long class. I guess when we go through, I think we did 2 chapters of Genesis and 3 chapters of Yasher. That makes for a long class. We're covering a lot of material. Let me just give the high points from last week, if you don't mind. We saw Joseph. Remember, he's been in jail now since he was 18 years old. 9 years later, the butler and the baker show up. They're in trouble. One put baking soda into the king's biscuits, and nobody liked him. The other one had flies in their wine. They didn't like that either. Got put in jail. A year later, they have a dream. Joseph interprets their dream. One's going to live, one's going to die. He says to the one, "Remember me when it is well with you. Get me out of here." Remember, this is going to be 18 plus 9, his 28th year. Because they came at 9, but this is a year later that they're having their dream. So he's in his 28th year. He's going to be in jail until he's 30 years old. And Yehovah said in Yasher, and I put it in pink here just so that we remember, that Joseph was in trouble for trying to use a man and get out of jail, shall I say, in the flesh, instead of waiting for Yehovah to do it in the spirit. How much of our life do we do based on what we think is right instead of waiting for Yehovah's timing? I want to learn to wait on Yehovah's timing. Well, Pharaoh had a birthday. The wine taster didn't remember him. But now he's having a birthday. And it says it's Pharaoh's birthday in Torah. But you remember what we saw? This was the time that the butler, the cupbearer, was released from prison, and the baker was killed. So it's Pharaoh's birthday. We saw in Yasher that this was not Pharaoh's birthday. This was the birth of his firstborn son. And he was having a feast for all his servants. But remember, we have to understand who the servants are. The servants were other kings, other princes from other lands. Zor, Goshen, and other lands. Tophanes, I believe, is one of them. There was 3 or 4. Those are the people who are coming to join him. But it says that the butler, the wine taster, the cupbearer, forgot Joseph. We then went to the next chapter. This was about Pharaoh's dream, and this is 2 years later. Look what it says. At the end of 2 full years. 2 full years from the birthday party. The birth of his firstborn son. How old is his son now? 2 years old. Now he's going to have a dream. Yehovah is going to speak to Pharaoh. He has a dream. We'll talk about that dream many times today because we're going to go over the same material in Yasher today. But look at this. Here's the dream. It goes from basically verse 2. It starts in verse 1. And he finishes the dream at verse 7. Then it says, "Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh, the two dreams. Now look at verse 9 already. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults. He's going to tell him about Joseph, and he did. He brought Joseph to him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph. Do you remember what happened in Yasher? She said, don't scare him. Don't scare him. Or maybe we're going to see that today. Don't scare him. We want him to be able to help us. So he told him his dream. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. Elohim will give Pharaoh an answer in peace. Do you remember he gave the baker an answer in peace too? But the baker died. Now he's going to give Pharaoh an answer in peace. We're going to see his 2-year-old son is going to die. And that right now, his woman is in labor, giving him another son. Joseph is going to give this answer. And the king is going to say, how will I know that the answer is right? Boy, I'll bet the king's going to wish he didn't ask that question. Well, Joseph gives him an answer. The dreams of Pharaoh are one. Remember, whenever Joseph talks to Pharaoh, he always calls Yehovah the Elohim. They say God. But it doesn't say God in any of these. Wherever you see the red that I put here, it says this. The Elohim. Ha! Elohim. He's being very specific as to who the Elohim is. Remember, Pharaoh's an Elohim. He sets the lawmakers, or he sets the laws. He sets the judgments. He's one of many in Egypt. He's the high one in Egypt. Joseph says, and the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by the Elohim, and the Elohim will shortly bring it to pass. Well, he did in this short synopsis, which we have in Torah. He did set Joseph over the whole land. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land of Egypt. Gives him a new name, gives him a new wife, a woman. And it says that Joseph is now 30 years old. I love how the numbers always work out for us. Well, 7 years of good, 7 years of bad. He was 30 when he ascended to the throne and became number 2 in Egypt. When he was 34, his sons were born to him. We don't see that in Yasher or in Genesis, but we do see it in Yasher. He's 34 when the twins are born, Manasseh and Ephraim. I think it's especially interesting what Ephraim's name means. For Elohim has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. There's a lot of people who say, well, we're Ephraimites. You know, well, maybe you are and maybe you aren't. Are you being fruitful in the land of your affliction? Could that be what makes you Ephraim? I wonder. All right, well, let's turn to Yasher. I want to do a quick review of what we covered in Yasher as well. We started last week at 45. Do you remember we talked about the wives that all the sons took? Some took Canaanite wives, some took their sister. Simeon, remember, took Dinah. Talked about all that they had. Some took widowed women. And the daughter, do you remember the sweet daughter that one of them took? Let's see if I can find that real quick. I really like that little girl. Sirach, I think her name was. Here it is, about the deno. Sirach. Yeah. It says, this woman, this is the woman who's going to take her? Yasher is going to take this woman. He had a woman, she died. He took another woman. She had been previously married to this man, Mechalia, who is the son of Elam, the son of Shem. But Hadorah, then is the name of that woman, she had a little girl. And it says that here, after the death of Yasher's woman, he went and took Hadorah for his woman and brought her to the land of Canaan, and Sirach, her daughter, he also brought with them. She was 3 years old. The damsel was brought up in Jacob's house. The damsel was a comely appearance, and she went in the sanctified ways of Jacob's seed. She lacked nothing, and Yehovah gave her wisdom and understanding. I like bringing her up because we're going to see that this is a little girl that's going to comfort Jacob in his grief concerning his son. I think we're going to see that, I guess not today. We're going to have to see that next week probably. So that was the wives. We talked about all of them. It was very interesting. Then we went to Joseph in prison. And we saw some different things related to the butler, the cupbearer, and the baker. We saw the fault of the cupbearer. We saw the fault of the baker, why they got thrown in prison, how long they were in prison, how old Joseph was when they came to him. And we also saw that it was, remember, Joseph got himself in trouble. But let me find favor in thy sight, that thou shalt remember me to Pharaoh when it will be well with thee, and do kindness unto me, and get me brought forth from this prison. Well, at the end, it says here, and the butler, this is 19, and the butler to whom Joseph had interpreted his dream forgot Joseph, and he did not mention him to the king as he had promised, for this thing was from Yehovah in order to punish Joseph because he trusted in man. And Joseph remained after this in prison for 2 years until he completed 12 years. All right, well, the last thing we covered was 47, and this was all about the death of Isaac. Remember what we said last week? Isaac supposedly died in chapter 35 of Genesis, the last couple verses of Genesis. But here he is, still alive. Now, I said last week, and I have to correct myself, I said that I believed that Isaac found out that Joseph was reigning in Egypt. I don't think Joseph or Isaac ever found out anything about Joseph. When Isaac died, I think he believed that Joseph was gone. He was never to be seen again. And we're going to see today that it was probably a year after Isaac's death that Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream. Let's watch for that. This was at his death. He blessed. Remember, he blessed Jacob, and then he blessed Esau. And Esau, the blessing, this was the blessing of Esau. May Elohim cause you to be a dread and a terror to all that will behold you and to your enemies. That's it. Remember what happened? They divided the inheritance. Jacob had the birthright. Esau completely ignored it. Hey, let's split it. In fact, you do the dividing. I'll take the first choice. But he had done it. gave him a choice, and then he said, brother, I got a better idea. I just heard what Dad said, that my sons are going to inherit the land. Remember, it's all about the land and the seed, the land and the seed. And he said, you take everything. The souls of men, the servants, female servants, male servants, stock, cattle, everything, gold, silver, bdellium, food, take it all and go away. And he did. Remember, he had that man with him. What was that man's name? Nebaioth? Remember Nebaioth, the son of Ishmael? He married his sister. What was the sister's name? I don't remember. It starts with an M. But it's fun to see how these people all fit together. Well, they made a deed. Jacob wanted to make sure that the land stayed in his son's hands. He did a deed. He had witnesses. Spelled it all out so there would be no argument. It says Esau took all this, and he and his sons went home to the land of Seir the Hittites, the Horites, away from his brother Jacob and his seed. Well, that finished our chapter. Today we're going to start now with Pharaoh's dream once again. Oh, we're going to see the rest of the story. Let's see how it pans out. In those days, after the death of Isaac, Yehovah commanded and caused a famine upon the whole earth. At that time, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, was sitting upon his throne in the land of Egypt and lay in his bed and dreamed dreams. Remember, the wicked get the dreams. Yehovah's men get dreams and visions. But it's almost always, in fact, I don't know a single place where a wicked man gets a vision. I could maybe think of one place, Balaam. It says he prophesied with his eyes wide open in the last two prophecies that he did in chapter 24 of Numbers. But up until that point, he always had to go to bed, and then Yehovah spoke to him in his dreams. And Pharaoh saw in his dreams that he was standing by the side of the river of Egypt. This is exactly how it starts in Genesis 41. And whilst he was standing, he saw, and behold, 7 fat-fleshed and well-favored kine came out of the river, and 7 other kine, lean-fleshed, ill-favored, came up after them. And the 7 ill-favored ones swallowed up the well-favored ones, and still their appearance was ill as at first. Didn't change anything. And he awoke and slept again, and dreamed a second dream. And he saw, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And 7 thin ears, blasted with the wind, with the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the full ears. And Pharaoh awoke out of his dream. And in the morning, the king remembered his dream. And his spirit was sadly troubled on account of his dream. And the king hastened and sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and the wise men. And they came and stood before Pharaoh. Oh, there's so much more to this story here in Yasher. And the king said to them, I've dreamed a dream, and there is none to interpret them. And they said unto the king, relate thy dream to thy servants, and let us hear them. And the king related his dream to them, and they all answered and said with one voice to the king, may the king live forever. And this is the interpretation of thy dream. The 7 good kine which thou didst see denote 7 daughters that will be born unto thee in the latter days. And the 7 kine which thou sawest come up after them and swallow them up are a sign that the daughters which will be born unto thee will die in the life of the king. And that which thou didst see in the second dream of the 7 full good ears of corn coming up on one stalk, this is their interpretation. Thou wilt build unto thyself in the latter days 7 cities throughout the land of Egypt. And that which thou sawest, the 7 blasted ears of corn springing up after them and swallowed them up, whilst thou didst behold them with thine eyes, is a sign that the cities which thou wilt build will be destroyed in the latter days in the life of the king. Oh, where do they get these things? Man-made interpretations. Is the king going to swallow this? And when they spoke these words, the king did not incline his ear to their words. Neither did he fix his heart upon them, for the king knew in his wisdom that they did not give a proper interpretation of the dreams. And when they had finished speaking before the king answered them, saying, What is this thing that thou hast spoken unto me? Surely you have uttered falsehood and spoken lies. Therefore now give the proper interpretation of my dreams, that you may not die. He's going to kill him. And the king commanded after this, and he sent and called again for other wise men. And they came and stood before the king, and the king related his dreams to them. And they all answered him according to the first interpretation. And the king's anger was kindled, and he was very wroth. And the king said unto them, Surely you speak lies and utter falsehood in what you have said. And the king commanded that a proclamation should be issued throughout the land of Egypt, saying, It is resolved by the king and his great men that any wise man who knoweth and understandeth the interpretation of dreams, and will not come this day before the king, shall die. And the man that will declare unto the king the proper interpretation of his dreams, there will be given unto him all that he will require from the king. And all the wise men of the land of Egypt came before the king, together with the magicians and the sorcerers that were in Egypt, and in Goshen, in Ramses, in Tophanes, in Zoar, and all the places on the borders of Egypt. And they all stood before the king. And all the nobles and the princes and the attendants belonging to the king came together from all the cities of Egypt. I think these are the servants that he had come and give a party for when his firstborn son was born. These are the servants that we're talking about. And they all sat before the king, and the king related his dreams before the wise men and the princes. And all that sat before the king were astonished at the vision. And all the wise men who were before the king were greatly divided in their interpretation of his dreams. Some of them interpreted them to the king, saying, The 7 good kine are 7 kings, who from the king's issue will be raised over Egypt. And the 7 bad kine are 7 princes, who will stand up against them in the latter days and destroy them. And the 7 ears of corn are the 7 great princes belonging to Egypt, who will fall at the hands of the 7 less powerful princes of their enemies in the wars of our Lord the King. I know I would be exasperated hearing these interpretations. Based on what? And some of them interpreted to the king in this manner, saying, The 7 good kine are strong cities in Egypt, and the 7 bad kine are the 7 nations of the land of Canaan, who will come against the 7 cities of Egypt in the latter days and destroy them. And that which thou sawest in the second dream of the 7 good and bad ears of corn is a sign that the government of Egypt will again return to thy seed as at first. And in his reign, the people of the cities of Egypt will turn against the 7 cities of Canaan, who are stronger than they are, and will destroy them. And the government of Egypt will return to thy seed. What is this? Peace, peace, when there is no peace. That's what it reminds me of. And some of them said unto the king, this is the interpretation of thy dreams. The 7 good kine are 7 queens, whom thou wilt take for women in the latter days. And the 7 bad kine denote that those women will all die in the lifetime of the king. And the 7 good and bad ears of corn which thou didst see in the second dream are 14 children. And it will be, no, I would say 14 sons. And it will be in the latter days that they will stand up and fight amongst themselves. And 7 of them will smite the 7 that were more powerful. And some of them said these words unto the king, the 7 good kine denote 7 sons will be born to thee, and they will slay 7 of thy sons in the latter days. And the 7 good ears of corn, which thou didst see in the second dream, are those princes whom 7 other less powerful princes will fight and destroy them in the latter days, and avenge thy son's cause. And the government will again return to thy seed. Got to have a happy ending for the king. Joseph's going to give his interpretation, but he's not going to give a happy ending, is he? At least not all of it. And the king heard all the words of the wise men in Egypt, and their interpretation of his dreams, and none of them pleased the king. And the king knew in his wisdom that they did not altogether speak correctly in all these words, for this was from Yehovah to frustrate the words of the wise men of Egypt. Why? In order that Joseph might go forth from the house of confinement, in order that he should become great in Egypt. This is the providential work of Yehovah. And the king saw that none amongst all the wise men and the magicians of Egypt spoke correctly to him. And the king's wrath was kindled, and his anger burned within him. And the king commanded that all the wise men and the magicians should go out from before him. And they all went out from before the king with shame and disgrace. And the king commanded that a proclamation be sent throughout Egypt to slay all the magicians that were in Egypt, and not one of them should be suffered to live. And the guardsmen's captains rose up, and each man drew his sword, and they began to smite the magicians of Egypt and the wise men. Well, now, look at this. Here's the butler, the cupbearer, finally coming forward. His name is Brouaht. We're finally getting a name for him. And after this, Brouaht, the chief butler to the king, came and bowed down before the king and sat before him. And the butler said unto the king, may the king live forever, and his government be exalted in the land. Thou wast angry with thy servants in those days, now 2 years past, and didst place me in the ward. And I was for some time in the ward, I and the chief baker. And there was with us a Hebrew servant belonging to the captain of the guard. His name was Joseph. For his master was angry with him and placed him in the house of confinement, and he attended us there. And in some time after, when we were in the ward, we dreamed dreams in one night, I and the chief baker. We dreamed, each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And we came in the morning and told them to that servant, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream did he correctly interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so was the event. There fell not to the ground any of his words. You know what? There's a lot of words that fall to the ground that people speak. That should say something to us. This made an impression on these men that none of Joseph's words fell to the ground. Now therefore, Adonai and king, do not slay the people of Egypt for naught. behold, that slave is still confined in the house by the captain of the guard, his master, in the house of confinement. If it pleases the king, let him send for him, that he may come before thee, and he will make known to thee the correct interpretation of the dreams which thou didst dream. And the king heard the words of the chief butler, and the king ordered that the wise men of Egypt should not be slain. Listen what he says. And the king ordered his servants to bring Joseph before him. And the king said unto them, go to him, and do not terrify him, lest he be confused and will not know to speak properly. And the servants of the king went to Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And the king's servants shaved him, and he changed his prison garments, and he came before the king. And the king was sitting upon his royal throne in princely dress, girt around with a gold ephod, and a fine gold which was upon it sparkled. And the carbuncle, and the ruby, and the emerald, together with its precious stones that were upon the king's head, dazzled the eye, and Joseph wondered greatly at the king. And the throne upon which the king sat was covered with gold, and silver, and onyx stones, and it had 70 steps. And it was their custom throughout the land of Egypt that every man who came to speak to the king, if he was a prince or one that was inestimable, I said, worthy of regard, in the sight of the king, he ascended to the king's throne as far as the 31st step. That's as far as they could go. And the king would descend to the 36th step and speak with him. If he was one of the common people, he ascended to the 3rd step, and the king would ascend to the 4th and speak to him. And their custom was, moreover, that any man who understood to speak in all the 70 languages, he ascended to the 70th step and went up and spoke till he reached the king. And any man who could not complete the 70, he ascended as many steps as the languages which he knew to speak in. And it was customary in those days in Egypt that no one should reign over them, but who understood to speak in the 70 languages. That makes sense, doesn't it? And when Joseph came before the king, he bowed down to the ground before the king, and he ascended to the 3rd step, one of the common people. And the king sat upon the 4th step and spoke to Joseph. Then the king said to Joseph, I dreamed a dream, and there's no interpreter to interpret it properly. And I commanded this day that all the magicians of Egypt and the wise men thereof should come before me, and I related my dreams to them, and no one has properly interpreted them to me. And after this, I this day heard concerning thee that thou art a wise man, and canst correctly interpret every dream that thou hearest. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, let Pharaoh relate his dreams that he dreamed. Surely the interpretation belongs to the Elohim. And Pharaoh related his dreams to Joseph, the dreams of the kine and the dreams of the ears of corn, and the king left off speaking. And Joseph was clothed in, it says, the spirit of the Elohim. You know, based on something that I saw today, I would say it is the Elohim spirit of the Elohim. I know it's, maybe it's, I always try and get rid of those definite articles and put them, or if they are there, put them where they belong. And Joseph was clothed with the Elohim spirit before the king, and he knew all things that would befall the king from that day forward. And he knew the proper interpretation of the king's dream, and he spoke before the king. And Joseph found favor in the sight of the king. And the king inclined his ear and his heart and heard the words of Joseph. And Joseph said unto the king, do not imagine that they are two dreams, for it is only one dream. For that which the Elohim has chosen to do throughout the land, he has shown to the king in his dream. What an honor! And this is the proper interpretation of thy dream. The 7 good kine and ears of corn are 7 years, and the 7 bad kine and 7 ears of corn are also 7 years. It is one dream. Behold, the 7 years that are coming will be a great plenty throughout the land. And after that 7 years of famine will follow them, a very grievous famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten from the land. And the famine will consume the inhabitants of the land. The kings dreamed one dream, and the dream was therefore repeated unto Pharaoh, because this thing is established by the Elohim, and the Elohim will shortly bring it to pass. Joseph's had dreams before, hasn't he? Remember the one Joseph has dreamed 2 dreams about sheaves, and the 11 stars, and the sun, and the moon bowing down to him. We're going to see those fulfillments soon. Now therefore I will give thee counsel, and deliver thy soul, and the souls of the inhabitants of the land, from the evil of the famine, that thou seek throughout the kingdom for a man, very discreet and wise, who knoweth all the affairs of government, and appoint him to superintend over the land of Egypt. And let the man whom thou placest over Egypt appoint officers under him, that they gather in the food of the good years that are coming. And let them lay up corn and deposit it in thy appointed stores. And let them keep that food for the 7 years of famine, that it may be found for thee and thy people and thy whole land, and that thou and thy land be not cut off by the famine. Let all the inhabitants of the land be ordered that they gather in every man the produce of his field, of all sorts of food, during the 7 good years, and that they place it in their stores, that it may be found for them in the days of famine, and they may live upon it. This is the proper interpretation of thy dream, and this is the counsel given to save thy soul and the souls of thy subjects. And the king answered and said to Joseph, who saith and who knoweth that thy words are correct? And he said unto the king, this shall be a sign, O my goodness, for thee respecting all my words, that they are true, and that my advice is good for thee. He says, behold, thy woman sitteth this day upon a stool of delivery, and she will bear thee a son, and thou rejoice with him. When thy son shall have gone forth from his mother's womb, thy firstborn son, remember the brouaht, he was born 2 years ago, that has been born these 2 years back, shall die, and thou wilt be comforted in the son that will be born unto thee this day. And Joseph finished speaking these words to the king, and he bowed down to the king, and he went out. And when Joseph had gone out from the king's presence, those signs which Joseph had spoken unto the king came to pass on that day. And the queen bare a son on that day, and the king heard the glad tidings about his son, and he rejoiced. And when the reporter had gone forth from the king's presence, the king's servants found the firstborn, the brouaht son, the brouaht of the king, fallen dead upon the ground. And there was great lamentation and noise in the king's house. And the king heard it, and he said, what is the noise of lamentation that I have heard in the house? And they told the king that his firstborn son had died. Then the king knew that all Joseph's words that he had spoken were correct, And the king was consoled for his son by the son that was born to him on that day, as Joseph had spoken. Wow, can you imagine? This is the sign. Talk about not having any words fall to the ground. Do you think he's more inclined to believe what Joseph is said in his interpretation of his dream? I sure think so. After these things, the king sent and assembled all his officers and servants and all the princes and nobles belonging to the king, and they all came before the king. And the king said unto him, Behold, you have seen and heard all the words of this Hebrew man, and all the signs which he declared would come to pass, and not any of his words have fallen to the ground. You know that he was given a proper interpretation of the dream, and it will surely come to pass now. Therefore, take counsel and know what you will do and how the land will be delivered from the famine. Seek now and see whether the like can be found, in whose heart there is wisdom and knowledge, and I will appoint him over the land. For you have heard what the Hebrew man has advised concerning this, to save the land therewith from the famine. And I know that the land will not be delivered from the famine, but with the advice of the Hebrew man, him that advised me. And they answered the king and said, The counsel which the Hebrew has given concerning this is good. Now therefore, Aradon and king, behold, the whole land is in thy hand. Do that which seemeth good in thy sight. Him who thou choosest, and whom in thy wisdom knoweth to be wise and capable of delivering the land with his wisdom, him shall the king appoint to be under him over the land. And the king said to all the officers, I have thought that since Elohim has made known to the Hebrew man all that he has spoken, there is none so discreet and wise in the land as he. If it seems good in your sight, I will place him over the land, for he will save the land with his wisdom. You know, what did we see in the Torah? It was like the decision was made by the king, and it was a done deal, wasn't it? But there's so much more involved that's going on, and we still haven't even seen half of it. Now look what it says. And all the officers answered the king and said, But surely it is written in the laws of Egypt, and it should not be violated, that no man shall reign over Egypt, nor be a second to the king, but one who has knowledge in the languages of men's seed. Now therefore, Aradon and king, behold, this Hebrew can only speak the Hebrew language. And how then can he be over this, or being over us, the second under government, a man who does not even know our language? Now we pray thee, send for him, and let him come before thee, and prove him in all things, and do as thou see fit. And the king said, It shall be done tomorrow, and this thing that you have spoken is good. And all the officers came on that day before the king. But now look what happens. And on that night, Yehovah sent one of his ministering angels, messengers, and he came into the land of Egypt to Joseph. And Yehovah's messenger stood over Joseph. And behold, Joseph was lying in the bed at night in his master's house in the dungeon, for his master had put him back into the dungeon on account of his woman. And the messenger roused him from his sleep. And Joseph rose up and stood upon his legs. And behold, Yehovah's messenger was standing opposite to him. And Yehovah's messenger spoke to Joseph, and he taught him all the languages of men in that night. And he called his name Yehoseph. Let's remember this. Yehoseph. 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 I have something I want to show you today. Remember, Yehovah's given him a new name here, but Pharaoh's also given him another name also, remember? And Yehovah's messenger went from him. And Joseph returned and lay upon his bed. And Joseph was astonished at the vision which he saw. And it came to pass in the morning that the king sent for all his officers and servants, and they all came and sat before the king. And the king ordered Joseph to be brought, and the king's servants went and brought Joseph before Pharaoh. And the king came forth and ascended the steps of the throne. And Joseph spoke unto the king in all languages. And Joseph went up to him and spoke unto the king until he arrived before the king in the 70th step. And he sat before the king. Oh, I think this is so neat. You know, I picture the 144,000 being raised up, the servants of Yehovah being raised up in these last days, and being downloaded with specific information. He says in Isaiah 52 verse 8, when Yehovah brings back Zion, his watchmen will all see eye to eye. You know, you got to push pretty hard to make Joseph kind of a shadow picture of them. But there's men that are being raised up right now who are going to help deliver Yehovah's people. Are there going to be people like Joseph? I wonder. And the king greatly rejoiced on account of Joseph. And all the king's officers rejoiced greatly with the king when they heard all the words of Joseph. And they seemed good in the sight of the king and the officers to appoint Joseph to be the second to the king over the whole of Egypt. And the king spoke to Joseph, saying, now thou didst give me counsel to appoint a wise man over the land of Egypt, in order with his wisdom to save the land from the famine. Now therefore, since Elohim, remember he calls Yehovah, not the Elohim, just Elohim, since Elohim has made all this known to thee, and all the words which thou hast spoken, there is not throughout the land a discreet and wise man like unto thee. And thy name no more shall be called Joseph, but Zaphanat Pa'anayah shall be thy name. Thou shalt be second to me, and according to thy word shall all the affairs of my government. And at thy word shall my people go in and come out. You know, when we hear this, I want us to think about men people more than we're thinking about lady people. Remember, we're talking about men leading men. Women are led by each of their men. So I don't think we're talking about male and female people. There are times that we will see that. Perhaps. Even then, it is not necessarily clear. We'll see it as we go through it. Also, from under thy hand shall my servants and officers, all men, receive their salary, which is given to them monthly. And to thee shall all the people of the land bow down. Only in my throne will I be greater than thou. And the king took off his ring from his hand and put it on the hand of Joseph. And the king dressed Joseph in princely garments. And he put a golden crown upon his head, and he put a golden chain upon his neck. Bling! And the king commanded his servants, and they made him ride in the second chariot belonging to the king, that went opposite to the king's chariot. And he caused him to ride upon a great and strong horse from the king's horses, and to be conducted through the streets of the land of Egypt. And the king commanded that all those that played on the timbrels, harps, and other musical instruments should go forth with Joseph. 1,000 timbrels, 1,000 Mechalia, and 1,000 Nevalim went over him. I have no idea what those last two things are. Sorry, folks, tried to find it. And 5,000 men with drawn swords glittered in their hands, and they went marching and playing before Joseph. And 20,000 of the great men of the king, girt with girdles of skin covered with gold, marched at the right hand of Joseph, and 20,000 at his left. And the women and the damsels went upon the roofs, or stood in the streets, playing and rejoicing at Joseph, and gazing at the appearance of Joseph and his beauty. And the king's people went before him and behind him, perfuming the roads with frankincense, with cassia, with all sorts of fine perfume, and scattering myrrh and aloe along the road, and 20 men proclaiming the words before him throughout the land in a loud voice. Do you see the man whom the king has chosen to be his second? All the affairs of government shall be regulated by him, and he that transgresses his orders, or that does not bow down before him to the ground, shall die, for he rebels against the king and his seconds. And when the heralds had ceased proclaiming, all the people of Egypt bowed down to the ground before Pharaoh and said, May the king live also, may the second live. And all the inhabitants of Egypt bowed down along the road. And when the heralds approached them, they bowed down, and they rejoiced with all sorts of timbrel, Michal, and Naval before Joseph. What an amazing event, an amazing inauguration of the second in command of Egypt. And look what Joseph says. And Joseph upon his horse lifted up his eyes to heaven and called out and said, He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts up the needy from the dunghill. O Yehovah of hosts, happy is the man who trusts in thee. Oh, that touches my heart. Happy is the man who trusts in thee. And Joseph passed through the land of Egypt with Pharaoh's servants and officers, and they showed him the whole land of Egypt and all the king's treasuries. And Joseph returned and came on that day before Pharaoh, and the king gave unto Joseph possessions in the land of Egypt, a possession of fields and vineyards. And the king gave unto Joseph 3,000 talents of silver, 1,000 talents of gold, onyx stones, bdellium, and many gifts. And on the next day the king commanded the people of Egypt to bring unto Joseph offerings and gifts, that he that violated the command of the king should die. And they made a high place in the streets of the city, and they spread out garments there. And whoever brought anything to Joseph put it unto the high place. And all the people of Egypt cast something into the high place. One man a golden ring, the other rings and earrings and different vessels of gold and silver work, and onyx stones and bdellium did he cast upon the high place. And everyone gave something of what he possessed. We're talking about the people coming. The people are the men. And Joseph took all these and placed them in his treasuries. And the officers and the nobles belonging to the king exalted Joseph, and they gave him many gifts, seeing that the king had chosen him to be his second. And the king sent to Potiphera, son of Achiram, priest of On, and he took his young daughter Athnath and gave her unto Joseph for a woman. And the damsel was very comely, beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. And Joseph took her for a woman. And the king said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and beside thee none shall dare to lift up his hand or his foot to regulate my people throughout the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before the Pharaoh. And Joseph went out from before the king, and he became the king's second in Egypt. And the king gave Joseph 700 servants to attend him in his house. And Joseph also sent and purchased many servants, and they remained in the house of Joseph. So he's buying even more servants. Joseph then built for himself a magnificent house, like unto the houses of the kings before the court of the king's palace. And he made in the house a large temple, very elegant in appearance, and convenient for his residence. 3 years was Joseph in erecting his house. And Joseph made unto himself a very elegant throne of abundance of gold and silver, and he covered it with onyx stones and bdellium, and he made upon it the likeness of the whole land of Egypt, and the likeness of the river of Egypt, that watered the whole land of Egypt. And Joseph sat securely upon the throne in his house, and Yehovah increased Joseph's wisdom. Wow. What did he say? Blessed is the man who trusts in Yehovah. And all the inhabitants of Egypt and Pharaoh's servants and his princes loved Joseph exceedingly, for this thing was from Yehovah to Joseph. And Joseph had an army that made war, going out in hosts and troops to the number of 40,600 men capable of bearing arms to assist the king and Joseph against the enemy, besides the king's officers and his servants and the inhabitants of Egypt without number. And Joseph gave unto his mighty men and to all his host shields and javelins and caps and coats of mail and stones for slinging. At that time, the children of Tarshish came against the sons of Ishmael to make war with them. And the children of Tarshish spoiled the Ishmaelites for a long time. Seems like we're getting off target here, but I want to show you something. Tarshish. Who's Tarshish? Where does that word come from? Here it is right here. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim. Remember Kittim? We were talking about Kittim was Rome. And Dudanim. These are sons of Japheth. Japheth is the one who had Javan. Javan had Tarshish. Just to kind of help us see where this is coming from. At that time, the sons, Tarshish seed, came against Ishmael's seed and made war with them. And Tarshish's seed spoiled the Ishmaelites for a long time. And Ishmael's seed were small in number in those days, and they could not prevail over Tarshish's seed. And they were sorely oppressed. And the old men of the Ishmaelites sent a record to the king of Egypt, saying, Send, I pray thee, unto thy servants, officers, and hosts, to help us fight against Tarshish's seed, for we have been consuming away for a long time. And Pharaoh sent Joseph with his mighty men and hosts which were with him, and also his mighty men from the king's house. And they went to the land of Havilah. Havilah, where is Havilah? To Ishmael's seed. Ishmael's seed seems to be in Havilah. Look what it says. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They dwelt in Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt as you go towards Assyria. he died in the presence of all his brethren. So where is Havilah? Where is Shur? Here. Here's Shur, the desert of Shur, east of Egypt. It's got to be in this area that the Ishmaelites were dwelling in. As you go to Assyria, talking about the direction that you're supposed to be going, it seems like that's the only place where they can be. And Joseph smote the Tarshites, those are the seed of Tarshish. And he subdued all their land, and Ishmael's seed dwelt therein unto this day. And when the land of Tarshish was subdued, all the Tarshishites ran away and came to the border of their brethren, Javan's seed. And Joseph with all his mighty men and hosts returned to Egypt. Not one man of them was missing. Hear that? When you fight with Joseph, Yehovah preserves you. Seems that way. And at the revolution of the year, and the second year of Joseph's reigning over Egypt, what would he be? 32 then, right? Second year, maybe it's 31, starting the second year. Yehovah gave plenty throughout the land for 7 years, as Joseph had spoken. Yeah, so we're starting the first year, apparently. He must have had a year to get set up. For Yehovah blessed all the produce of the earth in those days for 7 years, and they ate and were greatly satisfied. And Joseph at that time had officers under him, and they collected all the food for the good years, and heaped corn year by year, and they placed it in the treasuries of Joseph. Collecting corn. Where did they collect this corn? I remember seeing a video at one time. Maybe it was a documentary. But here's kind of some things that I pulled up that I wanted you to see. This is some of the grain storage areas. Look at this. This is a big hole in the ground. What is this big hole going to? We're going to see in a moment. Here's some other granaries. Ah, here it is. Can you see how that's kind of shaped? Kind of a funnel towards the bottom. There's steps going down to it. Some of these seem to be places where you took the steps and you could fill up your container. But others are different. Look at this one here. Again, I was pointing at this one here. I went to here. It says, could Joseph be Imhotep? Imhotep? What was the name that Pharaoh gave to Joseph? Was it similar to that? Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat. Is that what it was, honey? Mm-hmm. Jehoshaphat. Yeah.
Oh no, that's what the angel of the Lord gave him.
Yeah, that's what the Yehovah's messenger gave to him. Remember that? Yeah. It says, could Joseph and Imhotep have been the same person? I wonder. Here is a picture. This is over the top of a pyramid at this point. But it says, could the central shaft have been the first grain silo that Imhotep built for the Pharaoh? Do you see how they would put it's under the ground, first of all. This is not something that's going to be up in the air. This is something that's going to be down in the ground. It appears to me that it was underground and that they were serviced from many different angles. Do you see how the passages are coming in from different angles? I think it's very possible that they had to go underground, and that would make it more secure for dispensing it, because they can kind of keep a better eye on who's coming and who's going. But also being underground, you're going to have a constant temperature also, aren't you? Could that be a possibility? Here it is. This is kind of the grain storage area. Well, let's think about this as we go through some of these things. There's lots of stuff in Egypt still that men believe are things that were built by Joseph to store this grain. Going back. At that time, when they gathered the food, Joseph commanded, and they should bring the corn in the ears. So they're bringing it in the ears. And also bring with it some of the soil of the field, that it should not spoil. Are these instructions that Yehovah is giving to Joseph to preserve this food? Remember how important this food is. If it doesn't work, all of the work is for naught, isn't it? And Joseph did according to this year by year. And he heaped up the corn like the sand of the sea for abundance. For his stores were immense and could not be numbered for their abundance. He's got lots of these places. And also all the inhabitants of Egypt gathered all sorts of food in their stores in great abundance during the 7 years. But they did not do unto it as Joseph did. Oh, we don't need to leave it on the stalk. Oh, we don't need to leave dirt in it. I want my corn clean. Maybe there's a reason. And all the food which Joseph and the Egyptians had gathered during the 7 years of plenty was secured in the land in the stores for the 7 years of famine, for the support of the land. And the inhabitants of Egypt filled each man his store and his concealed place with corn, to be for support during the famine. And Joseph placed all the food that he had gathered in all the cities of Egypt, and he closed all the stores and placed sentinels over them. And Joseph's woman, Asenath, the daughter of Pharaoh, bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Joseph was 34 years old when he begat them. 34 years old, probably the 3rd year or the 4th year of the famine, depending on how we'd started it. And the lads grew up, and they went in his ways, Joseph's ways, and in his instructions. They did not deviate from the way which their father taught them, either to the right or to the left. And Yehovah was with the lads, and they grew up and had understanding and skill in all wisdom and in the affairs of government. Ooh, wait till you see what these young men are able to do at 5 and 6 years old. It's going to blow your minds. And all the king's officers and his great men of the inhabitants of Egypt exalted the lads, and they were brought up among the king's sons. And the 7 years of plenty that were throughout the land were at an end. And the 7 years of famine came after them, as Joseph had spoken. And the famine was throughout the land. And all the people of Egypt saw that the famine had commenced in the land of Egypt. And all the people of Egypt opened their stores of corn, for the famine prevailed over them. And they found all the food that was in their stores full of vermin and not fit to eat. And the famine prevailed over the land. And all the inhabitants of Egypt came and cried before Pharaoh, for the famine was heavy upon them. And they said unto Pharaoh, give food unto thy servants of Ed. And wherefore shall we die through hunger before thy eyes, even we and our little ones? He's talking to the men, little ones, probably tough, might be translated as families. And Pharaoh answered them, saying, and where do you cry unto me? Why are you crying unto me? Did not Joseph command that the corn should be laid up during the 7 years of plenty for the years of famine? And wherefore did you not hearken to his voice? And the people of Egypt answered the king, saying, As thy soul liveth, our Adon, thy servants have done all that Joseph ordered, for the servants also gathered in all the produce of their field during the 7 years of plenty, and laid it in the stores unto this day. And when the famine prevailed over thy servants, we opened our stores, and behold, all our produce was filled with vermin, and was not fit for food. And when the king heard all that had befallen the inhabitants of Egypt, the king was greatly afraid on account of the famine. Oh no! What if what Joseph didn't work? Not knowing that the people didn't do it the way Joseph told them to do it. But this is the fear that's going through his mind all of a sudden. And he was much terrified. And the king answered the people of Egypt, saying, Since all this has happened unto you, go unto Joseph, do whatever he shall say unto you, transgress not his commands. And all the people of Egypt went forth and came unto Joseph, and said unto him, Give us food. And wherefore shall we die before thee through hunger? For we gathered in our produce during the 7 years, as thou didst command, and we put it in the store, and thus has it befallen us. And Joseph heard all the words of the people of Egypt, and what had befallen this. And Joseph ordered all his stores of the produce, and he sold it unto the people of Egypt. I think it's really interesting that he's not giving it away. This is not a free-for-all. He's selling what they stored up. In this day and age, it's almost like it's owed to the people, isn't it? Well, we're going to see that it starts with food. They're going to run out of money. But Joseph is still going to work with them. And it's going to end up that Joseph and Pharaoh and the government of Egypt owns almost all the things. We'll see. Let's see, watch how it goes down. And the famine prevailed throughout the land, and the famine was in all countries, But the land of Egypt, there was produce for sale. And all the inhabitants of Egypt came unto Joseph to buy corn, for the famine prevailed over them, and all their corn was spoiled. And Joseph daily sold to all the people of Egypt, and all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, and the Philistines, and those beyond the Jordan, and the east's seed, and all the cities of the lands far and nigh heard that there was corn in Egypt. And they all came to Egypt to buy corn, for the famine prevailed over them. And Joseph opened the stores of corn, and placed officers over them, and they daily stood and sold to all that came. And Joseph knew his brethren also would come to Egypt to buy corn, for the famine prevailed throughout the earth. And Joseph commanded all his people that they should cause it to be proclaimed throughout the land of Egypt, saying, It is the pleasure of the king and his seconds and their great men, that any person who wishes to buy corn in Egypt shall not send his servants to Egypt to purchase, but his sons. You want to have something? Get food? The man who owns the gates is going to send his sons to get the food. And also any Egyptian or Canaanite who shall come from any of the stores from buying corn in Egypt and go and sell throughout the land, he shall die. So you can't take it, buy it, and then resell it. Got to be used. For no one shall buy but for the support of their household. Joseph is making laws to find his brothers, to call attention to those men. Watch what he does. And any man leading 2 or 3 beasts shall die, for a man shall only lead his own beast. Each man gets one beast. And Joseph placed sentinels in the gates of Egypt and commanded them, saying, any person who may come to buy corn, suffer him not to enter until his name and the name of his father and the name of his father's father be written down. And whoever is written day by day, send their names unto me in the evening, that I may know their names. He's going to check out everybody that comes in. He's looking for his brothers. And Joseph placed officers throughout the land of Egypt, and he commanded them to do all these things. And Joseph did all these things and made these statutes in order that he might know when his brethren should come to Egypt to buy corn. And Joseph's people caused it daily to be proclaimed in Egypt according to these words and statutes which Joseph had commanded. And the inhabitants of the east and west and all the earth heard the statutes and regulations which Joseph had enacted in Egypt. And the inhabitants of the extreme parts of the earth came, and they bought corn in Egypt day after day, and then went away. And all the officers of Egypt did as Joseph had commanded. And all that came to Egypt to buy corn, the gatekeepers would write their names and their fathers' names, and daily bring them in the evening before Joseph. Well, now we're going to leave Egypt, and we're going to go to what's going on in Canaan with Jacob's seed. Let's go to chapter 42. We did chapter 41 last week. Here's 42. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. It says saw. The word they use here, saw. He didn't see. It means see. Here, let me show you. I get captivated by these things. Here's the word here. Saw. Ra'ah. Ra'ah. He ra'ah. And he saw. I think saw is the wrong word. I think we should translate it as understood. He understood that there was land, that there was food in Egypt. That's how I would guess that it probably should be translated. Moot point, I suppose. And Jacob understood that there was grain in Egypt. Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said, indeed, I have heard, nurse heard, Shema, that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And Israel's seed went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Israel's seed, Bnei Israel. And Joseph was the governor of the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. This is verse 6. How did they get to Joseph? Does everybody go to Joseph? What's going on? How much has been missed here? I said they bowed down to his sheaf. That's what they said. That's what Yehovah said would happen, isn't it? What Yehovah says he does. Does every man who comes to Egypt come and bow down before Joseph? Why did they? Why is he speaking roughly to them? We're going to see that in the next verses. Why does he accuse them of being as spies? Have they acted out of the norm? Well, in Torah, it doesn't look like they did anything wrong, does it? But there's more to this story. I don't think we're going to see it today. We'll probably just finish this chapter. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. And he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, and they did not recognize him. It sounds a bit redundant, doesn't it? Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them. And he said to them, "You are spies." I put, how does one thing relate to the other? He's remembering the dreams that he had, and then he's calling them spies? Where does that idea come from? You have come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said to him, "No, Adonai, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons, the sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." Well, there's so much more that Joseph knows right now that they have no clue that he knows. We'll see it in Yasher. And they said, and he knows they're pretty good guys too. And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, it is as I have spoken to you, saying, "You are spies." What do we see in Torah that would make him think that they are spies? "In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not leave this place until your youngest brother comes here." I put, is Joseph concerned that they may have done something to Benjamin also and wants to be sure he's okay? I think that's what's going on. He wants to know that Benjamin is okay. Remember, he's got the same mother, Rachel. Loved of his father, the son of his old age. It may be a test to see that Benjamin is in fact okay. I think it is. "Send one of you." Listen what he says. "Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." He says this is the test. So he put them all together in prison 3 days. I think he must have realized, this is not going to work. They have hungry families. My father's household is hungry, and we need to get food to them. He says, "If you are honest men." No, he says, "Then Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, 'Do this and live, for I fear Elohim. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to the prison house. But you go and carry grain for the famine in your houses. And bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified, and you shall not die.' And they did so. Then they said to one another, 'We are truly guilty.'" This is what they're now saying to each other. But they're saying it in the presence of Joseph. Don't know that he can understand them. "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Did I not speak to you, saying, 'Do not sin against the boy'? And you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is required of us." But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. Again, Joseph is gleaning more information, isn't he? And he turned himself away from them and wept. And he returned to them again and talked to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Why did he take Simeon? Bound them before his eyes. or their eyes. And how did he take them? Oh, the rest of the story, and this is amazing too. Did Simeon go peaceably? Sure, just take me and lock me up until my brothers return. We're going to see he did not go peacefully. Well, here's Simeon. So this is from Yasher 42. And behold, Simeon rose up from his seat against them and sprang upon the ground and drew his sword and approached the Midianites. And he gave a terrible shout before them, so that his shouting was heard at the distance. And the earth shook at Simeon's shouting. Oh, I think it's really neat that I picked this particular scripture to show you a scripture passage from Yasher to show you this. Remember, it was the Midianites who found Joseph in the well, in the hole in the ground. They are the ones that pulled him out. They were the ones that were going back north when they happened upon Jacob's seed. And when Jacob's seed saw Joseph, it was Simeon who was kind of the speaker. And he scared him really bad. Here, let me just finish reading the rest of this. And the Midianites were terrified on account of Simeon and the noise of his shouting. And they fell upon their faces and were excessively alarmed. And Simeon said unto them, Verily, I am Simeon, the son of Jacob the Hebrew, who have, with only my brother, destroyed the city of Shechem and the cities of the Amorites. He's exaggerating a little bit. His brothers and their servants had something to do with the rest of the cities. So shall Elohim moreover do unto me, that if all your brethren, the people of Midian, and also the kings of Canaan were to come with you, they would not fight. They could not fight against me. This is Simeon being taken to prison. Perhaps being kept in prison. I think they took him out and they're negotiating with Joseph again. And Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provision for the journey. This he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, at Yasher it calls it the inn, at the inn, something that we should look at, he saw his money. There it was, in the mouth of the sack. So he said to his brothers, My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, What is this Elohim has done to us? What is this that Elohim has done? The to us is not there. What is this that Elohim has done? Then they went to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, and told him all that happened to them, saying, The man who is a don of the land spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, We are honest men. We are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine in your families, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. Trade in the land. Trade in the land. How are they going to trade in the land? They can get grub. They can spend money in the land. That's what we're talking about. Otherwise, you aren't going to spend money in the land anymore. That's what he's telling them. You may trade in the land. What do they call it? Traffic. Traffic in the land is what they called it in Yasher. That's what traffic's all about. Traffic is not about a lot of cars. It's about a lot of business going on. That's why it's called traffic. The goal is to get the traffic to be more efficient so that the economy can grow. That's what traffic control is all about. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And you want to take Benjamin? All these things are against me. Yeah, he's beginning to be concerned, isn't he? Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my sons if I do not bring him back to you. This is Reuben saying that. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. But he said, my son shall not go down with you. This is Joseph, my son. You know what? Look at this. This is Beneh. Can you see this over here? Beneh. Let me make it a little bit bigger. 20. Bold it. Beneh. But it doesn't have the proper noun attached to it. So when you see Beneh without the proper noun, you can understand it as my son. And that's exactly what it's saying. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity shall befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Oh, he couldn't take the loss of another son, could he? Yeah, if it says Beneh Israel, Beneh of the earth, Beneh, what are some of the ones we even saw today? Beneh of the east. This is what we're talking about, proper nouns. Then we can understand them as seed. Okay, from here, let's go back to Yasher. We can continue a bit. It says, and Jacob afterwards heard that there was corn in Egypt. And he called unto his sons to go to Egypt to buy corn. Remember, this is the first time that they're going down. Don't think this is the second time. It gets a little bit confusing because we're going back and forth. And he called unto his sons to go to Egypt to buy corn, for upon them also did the famine prevail. And he called his sons, saying, behold, I hear. There he says, I hear. I hear. Jacob also heard that there was corn in Egypt. Behold, I hear there is corn in Egypt, and all the people of the earth go there to purchase. Now therefore, why will you show yourselves satisfied before the whole earth? Go you also down to Egypt and buy us a little corn amongst those that come there, that we may not die. And Jacob's seed hearkened to the voice of their father, and they rose up to go down to Egypt to buy corn amongst the rest that came there. And Jacob their father commanded them, saying, when you come into the city, do not enter together in one gate. Why would he say that? Do not enter together in one gate, on account of the inhabitants of the land. And Jacob's seed went forth, and they went to Egypt. And Jacob's seed did all as their father had commanded them. And Jacob did not send Benjamin, for he said, lest an accident might befall him on the road like his brother. And 10 of Jacob's sons went forth. And whilst Jacob's seed were going on the road, they repented of what they had done to Joseph. Hear that? These men already, they're not even in Egypt yet. They are repenting of what they've done to Joseph. Listen to what they say. And they spoke to each other, saying, we know that our brother Joseph went down to Egypt, and now we will seek him where we go. And if we find him, we will take him from his master for a ransom. And if not, by force. And we will die for him. Here's men, sons, his brothers, that are willing to die for Joseph. And Jacob's seed agreed to this thing and strengthened themselves on account of Joseph to deliver him from the hands of his master. And Jacob's seed went to Egypt. And when they came near to Egypt, they separated from each other, and they came through 10 gates of Egypt. And the gatekeepers wrote their names on that day and brought them to Joseph in the evening. And Joseph read the names from the hand of the gatekeepers of the city, and he found that his brothers had entered at the 10 gates of the city. And Joseph at that time commanded that it should be proclaimed throughout the land of Egypt, saying, "Go forth, all ye store guards, close all the corn stores, and let only one remain open, that those who come may purchase from it." He wants to get the brothers to one place. And all the officers of Joseph did at that time, and they closed all the stores and left only one open. And Joseph gave the written names of his brethren to him that was set over the open store. And he said unto him, "Whosoever shall come to thee to buy corn, ask his name. And when men of these names shall come before thee, seize them and send them, take them," I would guess. And when Joseph came into the city, they joined themselves together in the city to seek Joseph before they bought themselves corn. Look at where they're going. And they went to the walls of the harlots. And they sought Joseph in the walls of the harlots for 3 days. For they thought that Joseph would come to the walls of the harlots, for Joseph was comely and well favored. And Jacob's seed sought Joseph for 3 days, and they could not find him. Walls of the harlot. Did they expect the worst of Joseph? This is my first thought, was that he's going to be looking for prostitutes? No, I don't think that was it. Or were they concerned that because he was so good, because of his good looks, he would have been forced into male prostitution? I think that the latter is what actually was going on. We'll find out. And the man who was set over the open store sought for those names which Joseph had given him, and he did not find them. And he sent to Joseph, saying, "These 3 days have passed, and those men whose names thou didst give unto me have not come." And Joseph sent servants to seek the men in all Egypt, and to bring them before Joseph. And Joseph's servants went and came into Egypt, and could not find them. And they went to Goshen, and they were not there. And then went to the city of Ramses, and could not find them. Joseph continued to send 16 servants to seek his brothers, and they went and spread themselves in the 4 corners of the city. And 4 of the servants went into the house of the harlots, and they found the 10 men there seeking their brother. And those men took them and brought them before him. And hear that? They found him seeking his brother. So this is going to be more information that Joseph knows. He knows what? They came in through 10 gates. He knows they disappeared for 3 days. Where have they been? What have they been doing? When he finds them, what are they doing? They found the 10 men seeking their brother. So he knows they're looking for him. And those 4 men took them and brought them before him. How can 4 men take Jacob's seed anywhere that they don't want to go? I don't think it can happen. I think that they were compliant for one reason. They needed grain, and they don't want to offend this man. That's why they were compliant. And they bowed down to him to the ground. And Joseph was sitting upon his throne in his temple, clothed with princely garments, and upon his head was a large crown of gold. And all the mighty men were sitting around him. Yeah, do you think he's thinking about the dreams that he had? Now Joseph had a dream, and he told his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear the dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then, behold, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaf stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." Yeah, isn't it all about grain too, isn't it? How interesting Yehovah does things like this. And Jacob's seed saw Joseph and his figure and his comeliness and dignity of countenance, seemed wonderful in their eyes, and they again bowed down to him to the ground. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but they knew him not. And Joseph was very great in their eyes, therefore they knew him not. Probably looked a lot different with the makeup and the different things that he probably was wearing. And Joseph stood, well, plus he's how many more years older? Almost 20 years older. More than 20 years older, 25 years older. No, would that be right? Took him at 17. He's probably 37-ish. Yeah, 20 years older. And Joseph answered them, saying, if you have come to purchase, as you say, why do you come through 10 gates of the city? It can only be that you come to spy through the land. Do you begin to see all the things that were happening now that causes Joseph to have the suspicion of what's actually been going on? They didn't show up. They came through 12 different gates. Something's wrong. This is not what the average people do. And they all together answered Joseph and said, not so, Adonai. We are right. Thy servants are not spies, but we have come to buy corn for thy servants. Servants are all brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And our father commanded us, saying, when you come to the city, do not enter together at one gate on account of the inhabitants of the land. And Joseph again answered them and said, this is the thing which I spoke unto you. You have come to spy through the land. Therefore you all came through 10 gates of the city. You came to see the nakedness of the land. What reason would Jacob have for telling them to come through 10 different gates? I can only think of one reason, and that would be that they would think that they're not brothers, that these are all servants posing as brothers, perhaps, and he wants to take away any possible suspicion. That's the only thing I can think of. Well, he goes on. Surely everyone that cometh to buy corn goes his way, and you are already 3 days in the land. 10 gates. Now you're 3 days in the land. What do you do in the walls of the harlots in which you have been for these 3 days? Surely spies do like unto these things. And they said unto Joseph, far be it from our Adonai or our Adon to speak thus, for we are 12 brothers, the son of our father Jacob in the land of Canaan, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, the Hebrew. And behold, the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan, and one is not, for he was lost to us. And we thought perhaps he might be in this land. So we are seeking him throughout the land, and have come even to the house of the harlots to seek him there. Oh, that would make you weep if you were Joseph. And Joseph said unto them, and have you then sought him throughout the earth, that there only remains Egypt for you to seek him in? And what also should your brother do in the house of the harlots, although he were in Egypt? Have you not said that you are Isaac's seed, the son of Abraham? And what shall Jacob's seed do in the house of harlots? Well, that was kind of my impression, wasn't it? What would he be doing there? And they said unto him, because we heard that the Ishmaelites stole him from us. Stole him from us. They sold him to the Midianites. The Midianites sold him to the Ishmaelites, remember? And it was told us that they sold him in Egypt. And thy servant, our brother, is very comely and well favored. So we thought that he would surely be in the houses of the harlots. Therefore thy servants went there to seek him and to give ransom for him. Well, that makes so much sense when you understand what was going on with Potiphar's woman. Remember how infatuated she was with him? Even her friends felt the same way about Joseph. Give me some of that. And Joseph still answered them, saying, surely you speak falsely and utter lies to say of yourselves that you are Abraham's seed. As Pharaoh liveth, you are spies. Therefore have you come to the houses of the harlots, that you should not be known. And Joseph said to them, and now if you find him, and his master requireth of you a great price, will you give it for him? And they said, it shall be given. And he said unto them, and if the master will not consent to part with him for a great price, what will you do unto him on his account? And they answered him, saying, if he will not give him unto us, we will slay him and take our brother and go away. And Joseph said unto them, that is the thing which I have spoken to you. You are spies, for you have come to slay the inhabitants of the land. For we heard that 2 of your brethren smote the inhabitants of Shechem and the land of Canaan on account of your sister. And you now come to do the like in Egypt on account of your brother. Only hereby shall I know that you are true men, if you will send home one of your brethren to fetch your youngest brother from your father, and bring him here unto me. And by doing this thing, I will know that you are right. Again, I think Joseph is concerned about whether or not Benjamin is okay. And Joseph called to the 70 of his mighty men, and he said unto them, take these men and bring them into the ward. And the mighty men took the 10 men, and they laid hold of them and put them in the ward. And they were in the ward for 3 days. Again, 70 men taking these 10 sons. Could 70 men take these 10 sons from what we've seen? No, they're compliant for one reason: they still need the grain for their families. It says, on the 3rd day, Joseph had them brought out of the ward. And he said to them, do this for yourselves, if you are true men, so that you may live. One of your brethren shall be confined in the ward, whilst you go and take home the corn for your household to the land of Canaan. And fetch your youngest brother and bring him here unto me, that I may know that you are true men when you do this thing. And Joseph went out from them and came into the chamber with a great weeping, for his pity was excited for them. And he washed his face and returned unto them. Who's going to stay? And he took Simeon from them and ordered him to be bound. But Simeon was not willing to be done so, for he was a very powerful man, and they could not bind him. Hear this. 70 men couldn't bind him. Then Joseph called unto his mighty men. The 70 valiant men came before him with drawn swords in their hands, and Jacob's seed were terrified at them. And Joseph said unto them, seize this man and confine him in prison until his brethren come to him. And Joseph's valiant men hastened, and they all laid hold of Simeon to bind him. And Simeon gave a loud and terrible shriek, and the cry was heard at a distance. This is the same shriek that we were just hearing about, remember? And all the valiant men of Joseph were terrified at the sound of the shriek, that they fell upon their faces, and they were greatly afraid and fled. Now look what happens. Isn't this interesting? And all the men that were in with Joseph fled, for they were greatly afraid of their lives. And only Joseph and Manasseh his son remained there. And Manasseh, the son of Joseph, saw the strength of Simeon and was exceedingly wroth. What happens when the sons of Jacob and the seed of Jacob, let's say the seed because he's a son, the seed of Jacob, get exceedingly wroth? remember, how old is Manasseh right now? He was born in the third or fourth year. Jacob was 34. And now Jacob is about 37, second year. So we had 30 through 37. No, 30 through 37. Let's say that's the first 7 years. And now we're in the second year. So from 34, 35, 36, 37, and 2 more is 5 years. He's 5 or 6 years old at the most. This is Manasseh. Look what's going to happen. And Manasseh, the son of Joseph, rose up to Simeon. And Manasseh smote Simeon a great blow with his fist against the back of his neck. And Simeon was stilled of rage. And Manasseh laid hold of Simeon, and he seized him violently, and he bound him and brought him to the house of confinement. And all Jacob's seed were astonished at the act of the youth. Oh my goodness! And Simeon said unto his brethren, none of you must say that this is the smiting of an Egyptian, but it is the smiting of the house of my father. Hear that? He knew! Well, I have to stop here. I really wanted to get through this chapter, but I have to stop. Next week, we're going to cover the rest of the story. Oh, there's so much more to see. Wait till you see how all of this is going to go down in Egypt. It is fascinating. All right. Well, remember, all of these videos are up on my blog on YouTube. You can all find them there. Please, if you would, subscribe. I'd be appreciative of that. My goal is to get these words out for other people to see. If you can help me, that would be wonderful. Hey, thanks for coming. We'll see you again next week, okay? Bye now.